Hey everyone, it's Jazz here. So this week for this video, I'm going to be talking about different steps and resources you can take at every level to be able to encourage you to keep learning. So it's not like, oh, I just learned this and I'm okay. But then you also want to make sure that you're also staying motivated to where you're challenging yourself, but also at the same time making sure you're not progressing too fast to the point where you're a little overwhelmed with the content you're learning. So it needs to be easy enough for you to grasp, and it also needs to be challenging enough to where you stay interested. So I'm going to give you those resources and the steps, and we're going to get started right now. So actually, I'm going to be referencing the CEFR, Central European Framework of Reference, which is basically generally the standard of learning any language. These different levels actually have a lot to do with what you can actually communicate and how you're able to communicate versus what concepts you're able to communicate. So with beginners, which is basically going to be between A0 to A2, so from absolute beginner all the way to elementary. So with this is that I really recommend that you start with pronunciation. I think that's the most important thing to start with. That is something that I start with all of my students, especially if I notice that they have they're struggling with pronunciation. You want to make sure that your speaking skills are very clear, so you're actually able to be understood regardless of whether or not what you're saying is correct, because people can generally figure out what you're trying to say based on the accent you're using. I also recommend that you start learning the basic sentence structure. So at this point, it's just more about how can I just put together something that makes sense. A lot of people want to start with learning vocabulary, but I really would stay away from that. Any vocabulary that you learn, you want to make sure that is in conjunction with the genders. So if you're learning nouns, in French, for example, you will never see a noun without its article. It always is some form of an article, whether it's indefinite, definite, partitive, whatever. There's always an article. Because in French, a lot of times certain words can have different meanings depending on whether it's masculine or feminine. So also in the sense that when you're especially with gendered languages, is that you want to make sure that if you learn words, you are learning them with the article, because that way it helps you to know which is which. Because later on when you start learning more complicated things, you want to kind of have an idea of, oh, this is masculine, so then it goes with this with this particular article. So you just want to make sure that you're focusing on things that make sense, because the one thing you really want to do is just basically from the get-go be able to start speaking right away as much as possible. That's it. My favorite thing is there are a lot of different YouTube channels. I really love the Easy Languages. They have so many different channels. You'll find Easy French, Easy German, Easy Spanish, everything. There's so many different languages on that channel. So that would be something that I would really recommend. Chatterbug streams, they're really great because it's live streams on an app where you can actually get plugged into little quizzes and polls, and they will actually just talk to you. And based on the level that you're at, I did a whole review on this app, which is why I love it so much more than any other app I've ever seen that's out there. But basically, I think it's a really great app if you are trying to really just kind of get a live, more of a group camaraderie type of learning, self-learning type of thing. So it's just basically, I think your focus should be here is, pronunciation, trying to make sure you can make basic sentences. What is just to complete a simple sentence, what is the structure? Is it subject, verb, object, or is it verb without the subject, like Spanish or Italian, and then all these other, direct object or whatever. So you want to know the basic structure of how to create a sentence, and then also you want to focus on just being able to, I would say, the focus on the indicative mood. A lot of people focus on that more than anything else, just past, present, future. How can I talk, at the end of this, by the time you finish and you, let's say you take a proficiency test, for you to master the beginner level, I would say you want to at least be able to have a point where you can actually tell a story, tell your friend a funny story that happened to you, that kind of thing. like some sort of story or what you're gonna do, just basic things like that. Past, present, future in terms of conjugation. So moving on to intermediate. So this is B1, B2. So these two levels are generally where you were going to start using your native language less. So for me, when I got to like B1 in German, the course was all in German. The questions, the quizzes, everything, the multiple choice responses were all in German. So there was no English to really to refer off of. So it's like focus on trying to be more autonomous, where you're relying less. So that means even using circumlocution more, to where when you ask questions about what something is or what something isn't, you really need some information, you're able to talk around it and find other creative ways to express yourself. This is where you really want to focus on cultural insights, because not only that, but this is like where you're preparing yourself to where you're going to be if you're like looking to travel, or if you're looking to study or work in another country. This is where you really need cultural aspects to complement what you're learning. B1 is generally the level where it is ideally that's the level you want to be at if you want to work. If you want to study abroad, B2 is where you need to be minimum. I say minimum is great, but I would say you should try to strive for higher than that, because that way that at least you'll be able to at least achieving B2 or B1, either one, whichever one, depending on what you're doing, working or studying, you're going to be able to achieve that. So yeah, focusing on cultural insights, and you want to find topics that you generally want to learn to talk about. So let's say if you are at this point where you've kind of mastered the basics of how to formulate sentences, you've learned some complicated things, like ways to make your sentences more complex. And let's say you're working as like an engineer. You would generally want to be able to know how to talk about your job. That's where you want to be able to kind of veer off into that topic, because generally, like I said, if that's your idea, if that's where you want to be, whatever language it is you want to study or you want to work in, you want to make sure that you're able to have the vocabulary to talk about your job, especially when you're around people who may not speak your native language. So that way you can basically express what you really mean, because sometimes miscommunication is really, really hard. It's hard to avoid. So especially you want to be able to know how to best and clearly express yourself in those topics. So at this point, like I said, you're autonomous, and it's like to keep yourself interested, you want to learn how to talk about those things. This is basically where, or even like thinking about learning new skills, because for me, when I was an au pair in Germany, that's actually was really funny, because my host mother, she did not speak English as well as so for me, she was trying to get me to learn how to drive her car, which was a stick shift. So I actually got to learn how to drive a stick shift in a completely different language. So she's telling me all these terms that these words I don't know, and she's trying to guide me through the process. So at this point, like I said, this is where you really want to focus on how can I use this language without, like, in avoidance of my first language. So going on to advanced. So this is C1, C2. This is where you're basically close to native speaker level. At this point, generally, your only problems you really should have is maybe like nuances. So this is where you want to focus on differences in like maybe dialects, accents, because like I said, for example, in French, which is a common language that I teach, is that you're going to notice that standard French that we know, like from France, is very, very different from Quebecois, which is on a completely different continent. You have like all these different accents that come from these different countries in Africa. You've got people in the Caribbeans. Even I think there's like a few countries that are in South America. So because France, they have all these different countries all over the world that actually speak it as an official language or as a language that they just learn in school. So because of that, you want to make sure that you're kind of understanding that you're going to encounter people who may not speak the French that you learned in school or that you taught yourself. One of the things I had to learn in a B1 course that I was taking on FunMOOC, it's actually linked in our website under online courses, which I'll link below. And that, I remember there were videos where they were showing people who were immigrants who were speaking French. And so I had to get used to listening to an accent that is like listening to someone who was, I think one of the people that they had on that video she was Moroccan. No, she was Chinese. And so she was speaking with like a Chinese accent. I could hear it. And then speaking French on top of that. So for me, I had to basically like think 3 times as hard. I'm thinking of this language, what I understand from this language, and then on top of that I have to understand and decipher her accent to know what she's trying to say. So those are things that you are going to really have to know, especially if you travel. There's going to be people who come from everywhere that they may not be migrating from, English speaking countries. They may be migrating from other countries that speak other languages. So that's something to really think about. This is a really great place to start looking for friends, native speakers. So if you're looking to study or move abroad, I would say that when you move abroad, this is a really great place for you to be able to actually go out and do things, like be social, find clubs that you're interested in finding. At this point, you just want to do everything that you normally do, and you want to put that in your in this particular target language. Because that way, you're connecting your interests, you're making it fun. These are things you love to do, like watching movies. Even I would say, like, one of the things I love to do is, like, I used to love doing was like yoga videos or Pilates or things like that. There's so many different, we're not the only people in the world that do yoga and Pilates. There are people everywhere. There are videos in all kinds of languages that are being posted of yoga videos or Pilates, or I even actually did like some ballet exercises. There's a whole YouTube channel on that. And so you have all these different resources you can basically Google or search through YouTube. Apply it to everything. Anything that you write, that like personal notes or anything like that, like your agenda or things like that, you want to basically be able to use your language. You want to basically not have to think about it. So these are basically ways I would say that, or these are basically steps or things I would really think about considering at every level. This may look different because sometimes, like for me, I love accelerated learning. So I like learning it as native speakers learn it. So a lot of times, the way I do it is different. So this is basically how I've learned all of my languages. Because I feel like the main thing is you want to learn by exposure. You don't want to learn vocabulary all the time because that's just words you don't know how to use. You want to always think about how can I apply it, because it's really different. Like I said, with vocabulary words. Okay, great. I'm learning these words, but how do I use them? Conjugation. It's great to learn how to conjugate. Like one of the things I feel like is just kind of a waste of time is when you're just like reciting all these different conjugations. I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to do with that? I know how to conjugate parler in all these different ways, but what am I actually using it for? To be able to, you want to make sure it's relevant to you, so that way that it's more accelerated, you're learning, it's intriguing, and at the same time, like I said, you're applying it to what it's applicable. There's always more to learn. Even if you get to the advanced level, you're still going to have so many things to learn. It's really inevitable. So thank you so much for watching. And if you have any questions, you can always reach me at my email, which I link below. It is jazzcole@languageandpeople.org. And you can also contact us on our webpage as well. Catch you next time.